Single truth governed the world of Mel Brooks, a truth so sharp and so absolute that those who crossed it rarely understood the cost until it was too late. A comedy genius who could make Hollywood tremble with nothing more than absolute silence. This statement echoed through decades of laughter, shaping the legend of a man who built cinematic chaos with the precision of a surgeon. To the public, Brooks was the architect of joyful anarchy, the filmmaker who turned absurdity into art. But beneath the whirlwind of slapstick brilliance and verbal acrobatics lived a private code, a personal doctrine that no studio executive, no rising star, and no titan of the stage could ever bend. The rhythm mattered more than the ego. For more than 60 years, Mel Brooks made audiences collapse into laughter, yet behind each joke was a fierce discipline, an unwavering demand that every actor, every scene partner, every creative force must understand the invisible cadence that governed his films. Comedy, in his view, was not improvisation without boundaries. It was a symphony. Each pause, each stumble, each frantic line delivered with breathless sincerity served a purpose. Anyone who fell out of tempo threatened the entire structure. And when that happened, Brooks did not raise his voice, he did not debate, and he certainly did not argue. He simply stepped back into silence. In that silence, careers inside his universe ended. This quiet form of exile shaped countless stories whispered behind studio doors. There were tales of actors who ignored direction, who tried to reshape scenes, who believed they were larger than the project itself. There were collaborators who mistook camaraderie for entitlement, who pushed past the boundaries Brooks built to protect his work. Some departures were abrupt, others were slow dissolutions of trust. Each one left an imprint on the director who understood better than anyone that a disrupted rhythm could destroy an entire film long before the camera stopped rolling. What remained hidden from the public was the emotional weight behind these decisions. Brooks was not vindictive. He remembered because the work demanded it. He remembered because one falling domino could collapse a structure he had spent months perfecting. He remembered because loyalty, timing, humility, and instinct were the lifeblood of comedy. Those who broke that contract did not receive dramatic dismissals or public confrontations. They simply vanished from his future. But behind the glamour and the excuses, what mechanisms are really driving this crisis? We will analyze every detail, from the initial mistakes to the irreversible damage, to see how the entertainment world works and how an icon is redefined. In this investigation, we step into the hidden chambers of Mel Brooks's creative universe, where decisions were made quietly, where silence carried more force than anger, and where five actors, gifted, unforgettable, iconic in their own ways, found themselves gently but permanently pushed outside the frame. Their stories are not scandals of headlines or courtroom battles. They are stories of rhythm lost, trust fractured, and opportunities dissolved in the soft space between two people who no longer understood each other's creative pulse. And as we begin this journey, one question lingers over the entire narrative. In a world driven by personality and performance, what truly determines who stays inside the circle of genius and who is erased from it forever? Mel Brooks understood that the foundation of every collaboration rested not on talent alone, but on trust, timing, and the unspoken agreement that each participant respected the rhythm of the work. In the earliest stages of his career, he learned that even the most gifted performers could unintentionally fracture the delicate structure of comedy if their intentions, instincts, or ambitions drifted out of alignment with his own. Nowhere was this truth more apparent than in the first cracks that formed with Gene Wilder, the partner who once felt inseparable from Brooks's creative heartbeat. Their collaboration had redefined what cinematic comedy could achieve. Gene Wilder possessed an unusual gift, a sensitivity to emotional nuance that allowed him to inhabit characters who teetered between sincerity and madness. Together, Brooks and Wilder constructed worlds where chaos thrived but never collapsed, where every scream, whisper, and trembling confession lived within a precise frame. Yet, this mastery did not emerge from coincidence. It came from a shared instinct, a mutual trust that allowed Brooks to hand Wilder scenes not yet finished, ideas not yet formed, and characters still searching for their own truths. Wilder completed them as if he had been standing in Brooks's imagination all along. The shift began quietly, like a small disruption in an otherwise perfect tempo. After the monumental success of Young Frankenstein, Wilder felt a new story burning inside him. He had crafted the script for The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother, a project that demanded not only his writing but also his direction. He approached Brooks not as an employer, but as a friend, seeking guidance, support, and perhaps silent permission to grow beyond their long-established partnership. In Wilder's mind, Brooks had always been the mentor who saw potential before the world recognized it. Naturally, he believed Brooks would stand with him as he took his first step into directing. Brooks, however, saw the situation through a different lens. He believed Wilder was brilliant, but not yet ready to command the full machinery of a production. Comedy required a uniquely disciplined vision, one that could guide dozens of moving parts without suffocating the spontaneity that made them alive. Brooks sensed that Wilder was not prepared for the weight of that responsibility. His refusal was not born from jealousy or fear of being overshadowed, but from a genuine conviction that Wilder needed more time. But timing is rarely kind to friendships. Wilder heard the refusal not as caution, but as betrayal. The man he trusted most had withheld the support he expected instinctively, almost automatically. Brooks believed he was protecting his friend from a premature leap. Wilder believed he was being restrained. These opposing interpretations widened the distance between them, forming a crack that neither confrontation nor conversation ever truly mended. The silence that followed was not dramatic. There were no arguments, no public disputes, no emotional outbursts. Instead, the friendship dissolved through absence. For 4 years, the two men who once finished each other's jokes did not speak, did not write, did not collaborate. During that time, Wilder made his film, filled with actors who felt familiar, echoes of the ensemble he once shared with Brooks. Yet the magic was gone. The rhythm was different, the pulse weaker. The world of comedy is sensitive, and even the faintest shift in tone can transform brilliance into something merely adequate. Brooks observed from a distance, not with bitterness, but with an ache he rarely expressed. According to people close to him, he once described the experience as watching a brother leave home, taking a cherished joke with him. For a man who lived through rhythm, this loss was not simply emotional. It was structural. Wilder had stepped outside the circle of instinct and timing they had built together, and once outside, returning became impossible. Trust in comedy is fragile, perhaps more fragile than in any other creative discipline, because it relies not just on skill but on synchronous intuition. Their unexpected reunion years later was polite, warm, even hopeful. The room softened when they saw each other, as if a trace of their old rhythm had momentarily revived itself. They exchanged jokes, smiles, and memories. But somewhere beneath that fragile warmth was a quiet understanding that the world they had built together could not be rebuilt. Not because of anger, but because the beat had changed. Once the rhythm is broken, it does not return with the same pulse. This fracture, subtle yet irreversible, became one of the earliest and clearest examples of the principle that governed Mel Brooks's entire approach to collaboration. When someone stepped outside the rhythm intentionally or unintentionally, the relationship shifted permanently. The silence that followed was not punishment, it was closure. Gene Wilder remained a cherished memory in Brooks's storytelling, but the trust that once carried unfinished scenes from one mind to another had dissolved. It marked the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself throughout Brooks's career, shaping the choices he made and the distance he maintained from those who drifted away from the tempo he held sacred. What do you think about this? Comment amen below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. Chaos in comedy does not always erupt in front of the camera. Sometimes it builds quietly, gathering weight in the corners of rehearsal rooms, inside whispered conversations during breaks, or in the shifting atmosphere when two visions struggle to coexist. For Mel Brooks, this tension was most visible when performers entered his creative world with their own gravitational pull, pulling scenes, castmates, and even entire productions off balance. The consequences spread quickly, not through tabloids or talk shows, but through the invisible but undeniable energy on set, where every misaligned instinct slowed the momentum that Brooks fought to preserve. Nowhere was this more evident than in the near collaborations that never materialized, particularly those involving actors whose reputations for brilliance came intertwined with reputations for difficulty. Among them, Chevy Chase occupied a unique place. His fame rose meteorically through television and film, carried by a signature deadpan delivery that defined an era of American comedy. Studios pushed vigorously for a partnership between Chase and Brooks. They imagined box office certainty, a fusion of two men known for reshaping comedic boundaries. Yet Brooks refused every proposal without hesitation. Although there had been no personal conflict between them, Brooks sensed an incompatible energy. According to colleagues in casting, he described Chase as someone who waited not for the rhythm of a scene, but for the opportunity to reclaim control of it. The instinct was sharp, the wit undeniable, but the detachment that accompanied both created a barrier. Ensemble comedy requires generosity, an understanding that each performer must sometimes surrender the spotlight so the collective scene can flourish. Brooks believed Chase did not work this way. To him, Chase held a style that consumed oxygen rather than shared it, and for a director who built films around coordinated madness, the risk was too high. The closest they came to intersecting was during the casting for Spaceballs. Chase's name resurfaced for the role of Dark Helmet. He had the right tone, the right face, and the right rhythm in theory. But Brooks barely entertained the idea. He selected Rick Moranis instead, a performer known for an intuition that adapted, supported, and enhanced those around him. Hofer, Moranis understood comedic timing as an exchange, not a competition. It was precisely the balance Brooks sought, a balance he feared would be disrupted the moment ego overpowered ensemble. This pattern extended beyond unmade partnerships. It reached deeply into the relationships that had once thrived within Brooks's films, only to strain under creative resistance. Harvey Korman was among the most brilliant examples. His work in Blazing Saddles, High Anxiety, and History of the World, Part 1 had defined some of the most unforgettable comedic moments in film history. Korman possessed the rare ability to hold a straight face just long enough to let absurdity bloom naturally around him. His timing was impeccable, his expressions iconic, and his presence essential. Yet behind this talent lay a subtle but persistent friction. Korman came from a tradition of sketch performances in which improvisation ruled. He thrived in environments that bent around his instincts, where scripts served as foundations rather than boundaries. Brooks, however, conducted his sets like orchestral compositions, where every pause and gesture supported a larger structure. When Korman attempted to reshape scenes during High Anxiety, suggesting new quirks, rewritten lines, or alternate directions, Brooks pushed back. He believed the comedic core had already been crafted. It simply required execution, not reinvention. The resulting tension rippled outward. Crew members described the atmosphere as heavy, a kind of silent tug-of-war between two creative forces who respected each other deeply but clashed in their understanding of control. Korman questioned blocking, lingered between takes, and introduced hesitations into scenes that demanded uninterrupted flow. Brooks, usually open to playfulness, retreated into formality. Conversation shortened, notes were delivered through intermediaries. The ensemble, once light and synchronized, became cautious, uncertain which rhythm to follow. These moments revealed how delicately a film's momentum could shift. Comedy thrives on pace, and any inconsistency slows the pulse. When actors bring resistance, whether intentional or subconscious, the entire production absorbs the impact. Brooks was acutely aware of this. He valued talent, but he valued stability even more. A single day's disruption had the potential to compromise an entire week of filming, and when momentum faltered, the consequences were not merely logistical. They were emotional. Castmates sensed the imbalance. Scenes lost their spark. The joy that fueled comedic performance became harder to summon. While the media rarely reported these tensions, the industry itself felt their aftershocks. Actors who drifted out of Brooks's rhythm found themselves quietly excluded from future projects. There were no dramatic announcements, no public disputes. Instead, the absence spoke for itself. A role that might once have been written with a specific actor in mind would suddenly shift to someone new. Casting conversations stopped including certain names. The ensemble evolved without them. In the broader public eye, nothing changed. Audiences continued to laugh, unaware of the fractures behind the scenes. But within Brooks's creative universe, these fractures served as warnings. Chemistry was not an abstract concept. It was the cornerstone of every joke, every scene, every moment of comedic truth. Without alignment, the structure collapsed. And in a world built on orchestration, chaos without control was not art, it was entropy. The media avalanche, therefore, was not a tabloid storm but an internal reckoning, a subtle chain reaction that determined who would continue shaping the comedic landscapes of Mel Brooks's world and who would remain at its edges, remembered for brilliance but distanced for the stability of the craft. Every great narrative reaches a moment when the tension that has been rising quietly, almost invisibly, arrives at its unavoidable peak. For Mel Brooks, this culmination emerged in the form of one performer whose presence symbolized both the brilliance and the burden of comedy. It was not a feud nor an artistic confrontation, but rather the realization that even the greatest comedic minds could not always coexist within the same gravitational field. In the constellation of names that drifted in and out of Brooks's creative orbit, Jerry Lewis shone with an intensity that could illuminate an entire genre, yet it was that very intensity that made collaboration impossible. Lewis was a legend. His influence on American comedy was woven into its foundations. He could write, direct, perform, improvise, and command a stage with an ease that seemed almost otherworldly. Many believed that pairing him with Mel Brooks would produce something extraordinary, a collision of two comedic architects whose styles, though different, both held the power to redefine boundaries. For the studios, this union represented opportunity. For Brooks, it represented risk. The breaking point arrived during early internal discussions around Life Stinks, a film in which Brooks sought to explore satire through a socially conscious lens. Executives floated Jerry Lewis for a major supporting role, convinced that his presence would bring prestige, legacy, and financial security. On paper, it was difficult to argue. Lewis possessed decades of mastery. His comedic instincts were sharp, his command undeniable. But Brooks sensed something deeper, something that struck at the core of his philosophy. According to those close to the production, Brooks responded with a simple but telling statement: "I do not need someone who believes he is funnier than the film." For Brooks, comedic success came from an ensemble that breathed together, trusted one another, and protected the rhythm. Lewis, for all his brilliance, carried a reputation for overwhelming any space he entered. He was a creative force who rewrote lines openly, reshaped scenes according to his vision, and approached every project as if the narrative revolved around him. In his own films, that approach was revolutionary. In Brooks's world, it threatened the equilibrium that held every joke, every reaction, every silence in place. Their only meeting confirmed this quiet fear. A mutual friend arranged dinner, imagining synergy, excitement, perhaps even the birth of a landmark collaboration. Brooks arrived with openness, ready to listen. Lewis arrived with purpose. As the story has been shared within industry circles, he launched into an uninterrupted monologue lasting more than 15 minutes, detailing the evolution of American comedy without acknowledging the man seated across from him. Brooks waited for a moment of connection, the brief spark that might suggest a shared vision. None arrived. This moment served as the climax not of a feud, but of an understanding. Jerry Lewis represented a version of comedic mastery rooted in self-direction, while Mel Brooks represented a mastery rooted in ensemble momentum. Neither approach was wrong, they were simply incompatible. To bring them together would have been to force two forces of equal magnitude into the same narrow corridor. Eventually, one would have needed to yield, and neither man was built for retreat. Brooks left the dinner quietly. The idea dissolved without public discussion, without tension, without regret. In interviews, Brooks remained respectful. He never criticized Lewis. He acknowledged his genius, his impact, and his irreplaceable contributions to the craft. Yet in private, he understood one of the most difficult truths of collaboration: not all legends can stand side by side. Some illuminate the world most powerfully when their distance preserves the integrity of their individual visions. This realization marked the emotional crest of Brooks's journey through these fractured partnerships. It was the moment when he fully accepted that protecting a set sometimes meant declining brilliance, refusing prestige, and embracing the quiet disappointment that follows lost possibilities. Jerry Lewis was not excluded from Brooks's world because he lacked talent. He was excluded because the gravitational weight of two powerful creative forces can collapse the structure of a film that requires balance rather than domination. And yet, within this crest lay a breakthrough. Brooks became clearer about the type of collaboration that sustained his universe. He understood that harmony outweighed spectacle, that humility strengthened improvisation, and that control did not stifle creativity when it served the collective rhythm. He realized that the success of his films depended on choosing partners who contributed to the ensemble rather than overwhelming it with individual magnitude. This understanding reshaped Brooks's future partnerships. He became even more discerning, not out of fear, but out of purpose. He continued to embrace chaos, but only the chaos he could conduct. He continued to welcome bold personalities, but only those who respected the structure that kept his comedic worlds from collapse. The lesson was simple. The brightest stars are not always the best ones to share a sky with. In this final turn of the arc, the narrative of fractured trust, creative tension, and unresolved collaborations reached its emotional summit. From the rift with Gene Wilder to the misalignment with Frank Langella, from the instinctive distance with Chevy Chase to the quiet exhaustion with Harvey Korman, each story contributed to the moment when Brooks realized that his universe could not accommodate every kind of brilliance. The breakthrough was not about exclusion, it was about clarity, and it was this clarity that allowed him to preserve the rhythm of the worlds he created, ensuring that every joke, every gesture, every beat of timing lived exactly where it needed to be. In the aftermath of decades of collaboration, conflict, loyalty, and quiet departures, the legacy of Mel Brooks reveals a truth often hidden beneath the glittering surface of Hollywood. Success in comedy is not determined solely by the sharpest wit or the loudest personality. It is shaped by an invisible architecture, a delicate balance of timing, humility, and mutual respect. Those who thrived within Brooks's orbit did so because they understood that comedy, despite its apparent chaos, requires discipline. Those who drifted away were not failures, they were simply out of rhythm. For audiences around the world, the films of Mel Brooks endure as monuments of laughter, woven with absurdity and anchored in emotional intelligence. Yet behind each performance lies the unseen labor of choosing collaborators who could support the structure rather than strain against it. The departures of Gene Wilder, Frank Langella, Chevy Chase, Harvey Korman, and Jerry Lewis did not erase their brilliance. They did not diminish their impact on cinema. Instead, their stories illuminate the fragile chemistry that lies at the heart of creative partnership. Each departure became a lesson, shaping the way Brooks approached every ensemble, every project, and every moment where instinct guided decision. The long-term consequence of these quiet separations was a refined clarity. Brooks learned that protecting the environment of creation meant preserving the rhythm at all costs. It required decisive action, even when that action came wrapped in disappointment or silence. His approach demonstrated that leadership in art does not always require confrontation. Sometimes it requires a calm understanding that not every voice can harmonize within the same composition. These stories also reflect a broader truth about the industry itself. Hollywood often celebrates the individual, the star who shines brightest, the name that commands attention. But the craft beneath the spectacle tells a different story. Great films are not built by solitary brilliance. They are built by teams who trust each other, who listen, who adapt, and who recognize that the purpose of performance is not self-display, but collective impact. In this way, the experiences of Mel Brooks echo across generations of filmmakers, reminding us that the most enduring creations are those shaped by harmony rather than dominance. As audiences revisit the films that defined Brooks's career, the underlying lesson becomes clear. His legacy is not only in the jokes, the gags, the outrageous characters, or the cinematic reinventions. It is in the discipline that allowed those elements to coexist. It is in the conviction that art depends on balance, and it is in the understanding that silence, when used with intention, can be as powerful as any spoken word. The story of Mel Brooks and the actors who passed through, challenged, and sometimes disrupted his world invites reflection on how fragile the boundary is between collaboration and collapse. It suggests that the true danger in any creative endeavor is not conflict itself, but the gradual erosion of trust that makes conflict inevitable. And as this chapter of Hollywood's hidden history draws to a close, a final question lingers in the quiet space it leaves behind. If these 5 actors once stood so close to Brooks's creative orbit before slipping away, then somewhere in the shadows of his long career, who else came even closer to altering the rhythm of his world? The answer, as always, waits in the silence.